Hello, everybody. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of the Rush Hour podcast. And we have a breaking news story to get to right now involving Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds. You can't make these stories fast enough. There is a TikToker who is really exposing the coordinated campaign between the New York Times and Blake Lively's camp, that smear campaign, we can buy anyone inside Hollywood smear machine. So what's so funny is they make a story about Justin Baldoni being a smear machine while they are the machine of all smears. So this is going to be very fascinating. This just crossed my desk. It's going super viral on TikTok from either this morning or late last night. Gucci Pooj on TikTok, go give her a follow here. Great work. Is replying to someone's comment, which says, the comment says, hey, this is all great, but did anyone check the metadata of the New York Times article? And everyone's like, oh yeah, the metadata of the New York Times article. So what they're going to show here is that the metadata shows that the article had the photos already saved and ready to go days before Blake ever released her initial complaint. Why is this important? Well, it just goes to show that they're not operating with any integrity whatsoever because they're coordinating with the news before the news breaks. And not only that, I'll show other examples of the New York Times, very specifically in this case, where they are not trying to get all sides of the story. I think when you want to be fair, and I've been accused on Blake's side and on Justin's side of, being on the wrong team, but I just want to be fair. I want to get all sides of the story. I want every stone left unturned. Let's go to this TikTok right now. Have a listen to this.
Because of this comment, I now have extremely compelling evidence that Blake Lively actually gave New York Times her complaint before she filed it with the Civil Rights Department.
Wow.
Comment says, this is great research. I don't suppose anyone has checked the metadata on the images in the New York Times article.
And by the way, this is why the internet always wins. Did we check the metadata? And I didn't even know they had. What's meta? Go check it. Oh yeah, it turns out the internet is undefeated. And here we have legacy media doing what they do, and then the metadata look, this is pretty damning.
The New York Times article. You beautiful genius. But it wasn't the metadata where I found the date. It's the fact that New York Times labels their hosted images with dates. And this image, if you follow the images linked in the New York Times article, each image is hosted with its own link. And if we zoom in right here, you can see that says December 16th, 2024, which means that unless New York Times mislabeled the date for this, New York Times had Blake Lively's complaint for at least 5 days before they published the article. And it's not just this one. All of the graphics that they used are hosted like that. This one is dated December 20th, December 20th, December 18th, and then this one is from the 21st. There was no date attached inside the actual metadata, or maybe I'm just not technically advanced enough to be able to find that. Why does any of this matter? Well, because Blake Lively's team are trying to say that Justin Baldoni's team are the first people that leaked this information to the press. And yet somehow on the 16th of December, they're able to make the headline image.
No. It's a whole misunderstanding. You see, the New York Times are actually time travelers, so they forgot that they had already gone into the future to see this story play out, so they went into the past, they got their dates messed. Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here.
I already knew because of the timeline, New York Times essentially had to have it in advance. Now I feel like we just know a little bit better about when they definitely had it by.
Yeah. We knew it, right? We knew on the timeline that they didn't go through the process of writing a story, fact-checking it, running it through their legal departments, the editors, the graphics artists. They didn't do any of that. They had the story before, and we knew that. It's just funny when you see blatantly how this plays out. This reminds me of the time when we were covering Amber Heard, Johnny Depp, and I was able to prove that NBC News had edited two different, the same interview into two different clips and selectively took words out which changed the tone and structure of the interviews. In the morning episodes, they did it all bright and cheery, and in the evening Dateline, they did it with a blues scale and made it more dramatic. And it's like, you can't do that. This is why podcasting is so popular. This is why channels like mine exist, because you don't get all of the coordinated things. You just get shooting from the hip, here's my take, right? And it's pretty damning because Justin's side didn't even get appropriate time to respond.
I think this is proof that they had it at least before the 16th of December, because they did have to develop this graphic. And by the way, it's really important who gave it to the media first, not who published it first, because the actual rule of professional conduct, Rule 3.6, which Blake Lively's team is trying to say that Justin Baldoni's team violated, in the part where it talks about when you can defend yourself, a lawyer can make a statement to protect their client if there's a publicity not initiated by the lawyer or the lawyer's client. Not initiated. And I think initiated is the important word. It doesn't say published, it says initiated. And if the New York Times started making graphics for their articles by the 16th of December, I think it is very clear who initiated the release to the media. I mean, it was clear before this, but now we at least have a date. Okay, love you guys. Drink water. Bye.
Wow. Drink water. Bye. I'm drinking cold brew today. This is hot off the press. You guys understand how big this is? Leave a comment. Let me know. Is this as big as I'm making it out to be? This is kind of why I love these cases, because, you clearly can have well, he said this and she said that, but hey, metadata doesn't lie. Right? For those of you that have been following us in our previous case, we've been covering Bachelor Clayton Echard, who was accused of being the father of someone's unborn twins. The twins never showed up. She made up the whole thing. We exposed medical fraud, Fiverr logos, cancer fraud. It's going to be a whole documentary someday, trust me. So you're hitching yourself to the right wagon as far as the types of channel that I think we can, do a good job here of showcasing how absurd this can be and how basic people on the internet can just crack the case. Looking at the metadata, looking at the names of images. No, they went back on the images and resaved them to a different date. Okay, sure. So with Clayton Echard's case, we were able to prove that the lady who faked ovarian cancer, she said, "Oh, I never faked ovarian cancer." We spent $5,000, raised a bunch of money, and we got a forensic computer expert to look at the metadata and show like 3,000 pages of PDFs showing she lied and that all the proof is there. The proof is in the pudding. Now, can you alter the metadata? I mean, I guess you could. Does the metadata have metadata? I don't know. I mean, but like in what reason would people have to do that? This case is cracked wide open. So there it is. Who's the smear machine now, New York Times? Inside a Hollywood smear machine. Turns out the killer was in the home the whole time. All right, anyhow, so I made this video over the weekend. It did really well. I interviewed my friend Kirsty Flaw. And I'm working on my accent. And she had her big interview, then my nightmare interview, 6.5 million views. Well, she was mentioned in the New York Times article. Well, now this is actually getting worse for New York Times, because if you didn't catch that interview, I'm sure you guys watched it yesterday. Here's the moment where she admits that the New York Times never even reached out to verify any of their claims with her. And it's like, look, Kirsty's a journalist, right? She knows how it works. To Blake's side when she sued him, and then they saw all of his evidence and they moved over to his side. And there is like this idea where you don't want to be labeled as like a, men's rights guy, or, there's always like something attached to you when you cover a story that might lean in one direction versus the other. So how do you, as a journalist, how do you sort of navigate all that?
Well, for me, it was a little different because I got dragged into this. I was mentioned in the New York Times article in a way that it seemed like I was a part of the alleged smear campaign. And for me, that was kind of, a trigger, because I knew that they had planted that in the New York Times. The New York Times didn't contact me for to see if it had any, any validity. And so
there was no journalistic confirming with you or getting a statement or any of that?
I contacted New York Times and they said that, we can't change the article.
So they issue a little comment underneath. Well, Kirsty says this afterwards, after the damage is done. And listen, I'm not saying Kirsty should sue the New York Times. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But damage has been done to imply, and for the New York Times to run with Blake's story without getting a reasonable vetting by her, because she could have proved that she wasn't part of the smear campaign. So journalists only have their integrity. It might not seem like a big deal, but like in order to be trusted, you have to prove like, hey, I've always tried the best to share the truth. You will not catch me sharing anything that I don't believe to be true. I vet my sources, blah, 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 all those things, right? Well, for them to say that Kirsty's basically bought and paid for by a PR company, that's really damaging to her brand. You might say, oh, it's entertainment news, no big deal. She's a journalist. I don't care what you cover or in which direction you want to label. Like, she's a journalist. She knows these rules, and she saw it play out right in front of her, where the New York Times didn't ask her for her side. They just ran with whatever Blake was sharing. It makes you wonder, and this is where this gets very tricky, because I've made this mistake in the past. When you're covering a story, sometimes that seems too good to be true. You might get excited. Oh, we got this big take. We're going to do this big smear campaign on Justin Baldoni. So they see all the evidence in a way to confirm that they're on the right side of the story. And the more you look into it, you realize, oh, when you get the full picture, it's way more complicated than that. So it's very fascinating stuff. I've been following this really great video here by the Inquiry. I've shared it on like 3 videos in a row, and they have so many great moments. But here's the conversation about Blake leaking the story to the New York Times early on.
Defense of himself somehow constitutes more attacks against her. So according to Blake and her team, he is not even allowed to defend himself in court or on the world stage, because doing so continues to be a form of abuse towards her. And you can tell that this is Blake's completely deranged take on things, because the way she released her original CRD complaint and the way the New York Times gave Justin an impossible window to respond overnight and then undercut that ridiculous deadline by 2 hours shows they are not interested in due process or pursuing the truth.
Wow. Well said, the Inquiry right there. Well said. Yeah, so they had this story as early as maybe December 16th. And they don't reach out. I mean, Law and Order here. Not really not much going. You know, I mean, what do we? I mean, so this idea that Justin Baldoni's got a $250 million lawsuit against the New York Times. People said, "Oh, that lawsuit's trash. There's nothing to it." He's got $250 million to the New York Times and $400 to Blake and Ryan. I'll tell you what, he's going to be doing a lot of vacations in Hawaii at this rate. I mean, this is looking interesting. I don't think his lawsuit with New York Times goes to trial. What I do think happens is they pay him a pretty penny, because you can see it right here. I mean, don't take my word for it. There it is. Now, I don't know if Candace Owens has journalistic integrity, to be quite honest. I don't know much of her work whatsoever, but she's been implying that the reason for this kind of giant attack by Blake to Justin, in part, is because of Ryan Reynolds thinking that there's some emotional cheating going on.
And I'm beginning to wonder, and listen, full speculation, no proof, for him to go that crazy, did something happen between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively? That's my question. Did something happen between the two of them, and then he came to set? Or maybe he saw maybe it was just a text message. I'm not saying they had an affair. Maybe it was a text message. He was going through her phone.
Maybe it was the dailies, as we covered on this morning's Rush Hour podcast. If you didn't listen, go back 2 videos for that. We covered that Blake was accused of sort of freestyling the kissing scenes on the final take. And usually when an actor has a final take, you'll set up a shot, you'll do a close-up shot, and you'll do it 3 ways for the director, and then they'll give 1 way for the actor to do it. Sometimes. That's a way of saying, we'll give you a chance to share your artistic freedom and ours, and then we'll choose what's best in the edit room. And anyway, the whole point is, well, it seems as though one of her biggest gripes of Justin is that he was not using an intimacy coordinator and freestyling his kissing. But now their lawsuit claims they have video footage of her freestyling her kissing, which, by the way, I'm sure they have the video evidence of that. This would all be on camera. So we're going to see that. We're going to possibly see scenes where she's grabbing him by the neck and trying things that might not be scripted. And Candace here saying, I don't know what set Ryan Reynolds off. Well, if he's looking at the dailies, it could just be that. What's interesting, I'll say this with Candace Owens here, is we live in a world where you have to know the difference between news and news commentary. And a lot of times there are journalists that will be journalists but also do commentary. In most cases, I'm doing commentary. I'm not breaking any news stories. In some cases, I do, in which case I become the journalist. So there is like Fox News, and then there's Fox News Entertainment. You have to know, are you getting what is supposed to be news, or are you getting someone's opinion on the news? So Candace Owens does a good job right here of saying, hey, full speculation. And I think we as audiences need to be better educated when someone's speculating versus when they're presenting something as fact. The New York Times, their smear campaign article was presenting as fact what he did. When we look back on it, it doesn't all line up. So that's, why he's got that giant lawsuit. So over $500 million in lawsuits happening right now. I'm sure there are full PR teams of the crisis management variety working all hours of the day to try to figure out how to slow this thing down. I'm here to tell you this right now. The momentum is only picking up on this story. It is a fever pitch. Everybody's talking about it. If you want to subscribe to the podcast and continue to support my channel, even if you watch the video version, if you just hit subscribe on Apple under your phone, maybe you'll catch it when you're driving, whatever. It really boosts my channel. So I appreciate those that have helped propel us. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers. When we hit 100K, I will, of course, promise to you guys to be reporting live from New York if and when this goes to trial. So appreciate all your support. Again, QR code to listen to the Rush Hour podcast. We have great information on this morning episode, and then coming up next in a couple hours will be the afternoon episode where we'll continue to break any new content that comes. And let me tell you this right now, with all of the people's eyeballs on this, you're seeing the lid being blown off the mainstream media here, New York Times, in their coordinated smear campaign. So the irony, very, very rich. We'll be back with more right after this.